With the launch of the Stars Reach Kickstarter, it's time to ask the crucial question: should you financially back this upcoming sci-fi sandbox MMO? It's a subjective question, and there's no guarantee a game in development will ever come out. That's the essence of Kickstarter. It's not a promise, it's a possibility, one that you believe in. The quick rule of thumb is if you can't afford it, or you can't bear the thought you might lose your money, then don't back anything on Kickstarter. I'm serious, I'm excited for Stars Reach, I hope it succeeds, but a video like this really isn't about that. It's about you, the players, and what you stand to lose, and what hope there might be for the game's success. The game development landscape is the diciest it's been for years. Games slated for release by major studios are being cancelled, and even a game's launch is no guarantee of a return, with high-profile games such as Concord and Multiverses underperforming and being closed. Investors and game studios are increasingly nervous, and it doesn't take a genius to see how this has directly affected the development of Stars Reach. Just a few months ago, the lead developer stated it was too early to consider crowdfunding. Now that time has apparently arrived, sooner than I and perhaps the developers of Stars Reach thought it would. Ideally, investors would have continued to pump money in while the community grew over time organically, and hype for the game gradually built towards release. But if wallets are closing across the industry, you've got to prise them open again with a community that's on fire for your game. Preamble over anyway, let's get to the point. The question of whether or not to back a Kickstarter seems to come down to three key things for me. One, what is the state of the game right now? Is it in early development, design docs and concept art, or are we talking about a game that's been in development for quite a while? Number two, what is the likelihood the team will stay the course and deliver on its promise? 3. What about this particular game is so exciting and different that you should risk your own money in order to see it come to fruition? In the rest of this video, we'll look at those three questions in depth. First up, state of the game. I first jumped into Stars Reach last year, November 2024. It's February 2025 now, just 4 short months later. I'm not going to repeat everything I said in that initial video. I advise you to go and watch it, but now I'm glad I did because it means I can talk about the things that have changed in such a short time. And it's this, rather than any specific build of the game, that is the most impressive to me. The pace of updates and the speed at which the game is evolving suggests a development platform and a production pipeline that is slick and relatively painless. There are bugs, of course there are. It is still alpha, and there are many rough edges, but that's the point. It's at this stage and it's still in alpha. There are games at launch that aren't as smooth or playable as this. Some specific things I noticed upon my return. The environment feels a lot more immersive and interesting to explore now, with wooded areas transitioning seamlessly into plains, hills and mountains, salt flats and small bodies of water. It's all kind of starting to tie together into a cohesive whole. There are several planets with different biomes and the beginnings of a temperature system, with the tops of mountains being cold and covered in ice, so you slide around and your character's breathing becomes more laboured. I mentioned in my first video that difficult to articulate sense that your character isn't part of the world yet. They don't feel anchored. Well, if that sense was hard to communicate, then it's largely been remedied in an equally imperceptible way to me as a layman. My character did feel like he belonged there now. The telltale sense of whether a game world is working for me is whether I feel a sense of nausea or excitement when I jump from a high height. Okay, I'll admit it, my butt tingles. Okay, I'm not proud of it, but when I do that, my butt tingles. That's the sign that some part of my brain has transferred itself to the character and I feel part of the world. Climbing. Climbing is now my favourite thing to do in the game, and the highlight for me of this session was this moment, doing a Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible up this sheer rock. Then getting to the top and not being able to figure out how to get down. It occurs to me now I could have just climbed down. There's probably a way to do that, but I didn't. Instead I started digging. Then eventually I just decided to jump. Worthy of note, there are traversal skills that make this whole thing all the more appealing, like a grapple. Skills have been added and refined, and the general flow of the game is much easier to understand with a short tutorial at the beginning. All the plants in the game are now interactable. You harvest them for resources, and after this session I had a greater sense of how really there's nothing in this game that you can't interact with and change somehow or use somehow. It's part of what makes Stars Reach a more interesting prospect than your average MMO, but I'll talk about that when we get to part 3, what makes it different. For right now, it's enough to say that the elements needed for proper crafting and construction they are in place within these various worlds. The nature of these testing sessions is that they're very short, only 2 hours, and your characters get wiped. So personally, I've not had an opportunity to really familiarize myself with the building or even the terraforming yet. Some people are very quick, however, having repeated the process multiple times. They know exactly what to do to get started. This chap was already building a space platform only an hour into the test. I assumed that most large rock formations, mountains and whatnot, were solid, but I followed this tunnel, obviously dug by a player, into a large cavern that opened out in front of me that obviously wasn't dug by him. This opened up many more opportunities for spelunking, Minecraft style gameplay in dungeons that I hadn't even considered before. The Minecraft vibes were strong here. The enemies are tougher, and on several occasions I found myself avoiding them and being careful where I went. That never happened before. They just kind of wandered around and you could beat them easily. Combat also feels better. I even stumbled across a world boss of sorts and spent an enjoyable 15 minutes in this bullet hell minigame with this floating eyeball that split into smaller eyeballs as the fight progressed. I'm trying to cover everything that jumped out at me and felt significantly different from my previous visit, so bear with me. This time I focused more on exploration and came away with a much better understanding of the game's shape, if that makes sense. These aren't massive planets. That's something worthy of note. The game's freeform nature might lead you to believe when the devs say planet, they're referring to a spherical object you can traverse from pole to pole, like in No Man's Sky. That's not the case, with the boundaries of each world being clearly visible. You can even peer over the edge of them. And in the interests of further managing expectations, it's worth noting that there currently is no way to travel between planets without teleportation. You can't fly up through the atmosphere into space, then physically travel to another planet. The game world is zoned, much like World of Warcraft or other traditional MMOs. And whilst those zones are freeform, the galaxy at large seems more like a series of instances to me. Other things still aren't in. There are slots for clothing, but no character customization as of yet, apart from your choice of gender and race. And small details like your character's inability to swim break that sense of immersion. There aren't even any bodies of water big enough to make swimming necessary, but in a game that goes so hard for the simulation aspects of a real environment, it's an omission that does stand out. So there is work still to do, probably a lot of work, but to reiterate, the point of this video isn't really to assess every nuance of the gameplay as it stands. It will be constantly changing and is being updated, but to give you a sense of where the development is at. In short, far from the beginning. It's already a fairly playable game with some fun aspects, and as I say, I've played full-fledged releases that aren't as fully featured as this one. So if the question for you as to whether you kickstart this game, it comes down to the idea of what stage the game is at, then this game is much further on than the majority of games that ask for crowdfunding. And the pace of updates is impressive. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how they're pulling it off without introducing a plethora of bugs with each patch. Raf Costa has spoken in the past about the underlying tech, how the aim is to make things very changeable, updates possible on the fly while the game is still running. So perhaps the pace of development is the first reflection, evidence of this. Point 2 on my 3-point checklist about whether you should give game developers your money. What is the likelihood this team will stay the course and deliver? There's no doubting the passion of the people involved. Veterans of the industry are actively working on or have had input into the game in the past, but the team is also made up of other people who are earlier on in their careers. In one of my earliest videos about Playable Worlds, I tried to do some sleuthing about the sort of game the company might be making and came across many interesting names. Some of those have moved on, whilst others have joined the team in the meantime. Early on, in fact, the idea was to create a platform for games, and Stars Reach, we didn't know the name back then, was going to be the game that they were developing as the proof of concept that it worked. Whether that is still the ultimate goal or not, I can't say, but I suspect those grand designs might have been pulled back a bit, given the economic reality of game development right now. It was all wrapped up in the hype, if you remember, surrounding metaverse. That became a excruciatingly annoying buzzword for a while, and blockchain, which always felt like futurist technobabble to me, or a scam at worst. At the risk of sounding like a Luddite, I feel it's beyond the scope of any one person or company to create a new paradigm. In game development, in philosophy, in art, in business, whatever, people are better off focusing down on something more concrete, something where the value proposition is clear. So personally, I'm glad that Playable Worlds is focused on a game. plain and simple. Raf Costa has always had his theory of fun, and Stars Reach is his attempt to offer it in as clear and crisp a way as possible, free from publisher oversight or licensing agreements. So what is the likelihood the team will stay the course and deliver? If it's a question of drive or passion, there isn't a question to be answered. That's obviously there. The only thing that can scupper them, in my opinion, are the finances and the reality of game development in this increasingly jittery market. Finally, number 3 in my bullet points, what about this game makes it exciting or different? I've mentioned a lot of this in my previous videos, so I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I don't want to repeat myself. They're all there for you to watch. There's a playlist on the channel, but in short, 3 words. It's a 3-point bullet list, and these are 3 words that make Stars Reach interesting and different. Sandbox, MMORPG, player driven. That's 4 words and an acronym. Anyway, those are the 3 things that make Stars Reach unique for me. Yes, there's the building of the structures, making your own house, building cities, running planets. Yes, there's the terrain manipulation, which all looks very exciting and create all kinds of structures. Yes, there's the intricate crafting and the potential economy that's going to arise, giving players stuff to do, and they're going to be all tradespeople. All of those are things that most MMOs don't have, but those 3 words that I mentioned are things that studios neglect. They hear the word sandbox and they think unstructured and difficult to understand. They hear MMORPG and they get cold chills. It's a dead genre, a failed experiment. They hear player driven and they get nervous. You can't let the players do what they want. They could do anything. That lack of control is terrifying. The truth is, however, that those 3 things can and do work. They're proven to work. They're just a lot harder to quantify for investors. Stars Reach is a strange beast, it seems to me. A game that's originality comes as much from the past as it does from the future. And looking forward, this strange amalgam of ideas, some of which have fallen out of vogue, but should never have, combined with the latest tech and modern design sensibilities. In terms of it being different, I'm sold on that point, personally. Should you back it though? You've probably realised I'm not going to give you an answer one way or another. How can I? I can't tell you what you want or how excited you are. All I can convey is what I've experienced, what I'm thinking, in the hopes that you can come to an informed decision. The answer for me is yes. What you do is entirely up to you. I've posted the play session in full with no commentary, just so you can see and hear everything I experience, and it's as close to playing for you as possible. Thanks for watching. I've been Napiet, and I'll see you next time.